So we got John Calvin Thomas and we got Andy Brice with us, and the reason that I'm talking to you today is to do with a thing that happened quite a few years ago now, really. But a band called Zipper, and The Life of Riley, and a single which went on to be a Radio 1 single of the week, which was quite a major thing at the time. Who wrote the song, by the way?
It was I.
There you go.
Yeah.
So Mr. Brice, tell us about The Life of Riley and the idea behind the song originally, because it's a fairly simple song, really, isn't it?
No, it didn't start out that way. It started out as it was written over a sort of set of weird descending jazzy chords.
Ooh.
That were getting more and more complex and completely out of my range. But I had the arrogance to think I knew how they all connected. Probably they didn't. And it was. And it was getting stupider and stupider musically. Yeah. And I came back one night, and this was about 1974, 75. I was living in Miskin Street in Cardiff. I came back from the New Ely. This was sort of I was never a great drinker, but I had been drinking a little. And I sort of pulled out my cheapo acoustic guitar and thought, this is going completely stupid. And then da 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 da. You can't do that. That's Twinkle Twinkle Little Star.
Oh yeah.
And for the doctor. And then I thought, no, it's so obvious I want to do it, and that's what happened. And it was originally, although it came out as a sort of a London-y thing, it was more to do with my memories of kids in two places, Stoke-on-Trent and Sheffield, which I had connections with back as a kid, and that was about it, really. And I mean, sort of shamelessly ripping off Hi-Ho Silver Lining and stuff like that. But yeah, that was about it, really.
So I actually, till you said that, I'd never thought about the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star thing. I can kind of hear it now, but so Riley, was that a fictional character then, I suppose, was it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like a sort of a phrase, a bit like Bob's your uncle, and I am a geek for these things, but funnily enough, with origins of popular phrases, but I've never ever. Actually, I'd like to do that in a minute. Googled Life of Riley to see who the original Riley was. I mean, it's just a sort of a saying, Bob's your uncle, it's the Life of Riley. Yeah.
And of course, that's the kind of thing that I suppose great songwriters actually. I'm thinking like Tom Petty and maybe even people like Neil Young and people like this, and where they kind of have they take these reference points, these little phrases and whatever, and then they turn them into songs, and they kind of build their songs that way. So it's quite an established way to do things. But it's a great song anyway, and I still got the tune in my head. So
good. Yeah.
Without all those massive chords in it, it still works. It's all good.
Yeah.
So John, you were the singer, of course, in Zipper.
Yeah.
And how did you first get involved, and how long have you known Andy?
Well, it goes back to college days. Ray, the guitarist, was a guitarist in a band. This was before Andy joined, a band called Redwood Freeway. And they played in Birmingham, came down to university in Cardiff. And on the last night of the first term, Ray said to me, I've seen you tapping on the table and singing along to the jukebox. He said, do you fancy coming to audition for our band?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I've never sung with a band in my life. And he said, in fact, I'd never sung in any context really, other than in the choir at school, very badly. And he said, come along anyway. So I went along to the audition, and there were 3 people auditioning. And apparently I only knew one of their songs. And apparently after about 3 bars in, the drummer looked at Ray and sort of raised his eyebrows like this, because I was so bad. But luckily I was I was better than the other 2. So I can't remember the details exactly, but I think this was a Thursday. And then Ray said to me, excuse me, he said, we're playing in the Great Hall of the Students' Union on Tuesday. Are you in?
Wow.
Bear in mind, I'd never sung, and in 4 days' time, I'm supposed to be singing. He said there'll be 2,000 people there. So, I had to learn as much of the set as I could, and it was probably about 23 songs or something. I managed to learn about 12 of them. I had all the words sellotaped to the stage, and I was absolutely petrified all day thinking about this gig. What have I let myself in for? And I was still shaking as I sort of approached the stage. But as soon as our first song was Smoke on the Water. And as soon as I heard those chords,
my Lord forgive us,
ringing out. Yeah, I know. Embarrassing to relate now, but as soon as I heard those chords, my fear completely went. And I just remember standing there in the spotlight, absolutely adoring it. And I managed to get through it okay. And we went down quite well. That was the first time I played. And then Andy joined as a bass player. It was a couple of years later, wasn't it, Andy?
Yeah. Hello.
I can never remember the chronology.
That was still Zipper though, John, was it?
Well,
was that what was to become Zipper? Andy?
So John's froze at the moment. And I think it morphed fairly quickly into Zipper before I joined. And I was originally was sort of hustler for them. I was getting gigs for them and things like that. And then what happened? And I thought I'll try and write a couple of songs for you, or I've got a couple of things for you. So I was just sort of a mate. And I think Skid, who was the bass player at the time, wanted to move on to join a band. I think it might have been called the Walkie Talkies, which had Carl Hyde in them. So he was poached by Carl.
Wow.
So Skid, I think that's right. Anyway, so Skid were, all mates and that, but Skid sort of went off, and I was sort of drafted in, and I'd not been a bass player. I'd been like most bass players, I was a failed guitarist,
and that's how no comment.
Well, no, we have our crosses to bear, hang on, dog's barking, mate. 2 ticks.
Sweet spot of the beard we found, anyway. So John, where are you based these days? You're in Cornwall as well. You're both not very far away from each other, then.
Well, I think it's about an hour and a half's drive, something like that. And we've been here for some time. I haven't yet been over to the neck of the woods that Andy lives in, and he hasn't strayed this way. But we are planning to have a get together at some point, and maybe get the guitars out. When I was in the band for 5 or 6 years, I couldn't play a note really on the guitar. But since then, I've actually learnt to play. And so it was a massive, hole in my experience. I don't know why, being surrounded by guitar players and music, I didn't pick the thing up and try and learn. But I put that right now anyway. So I can play a few tunes on the guitar. So I'm looking forward to doing that with Andy at some point in the not too distant future.
So Andy, you play guitar and bass, don't you?
Yeah.
So you could chip in on either scenario. Andy, just to come to you, sorry with the mic, it's just it's Zoom stuff is so weird. It's either too much or too little. You can hear yourself in your headphones anyway, can't you?
Yeah.
Tell me about with Life of Riley then, for example. How did you end up getting that as the Radio 1 single of the week?
Long story. We initially what we did, and it was just sort of it was funny really, because we said we'll save up the gig money and we will pay for we'll find a studio and just go in and do a what do you call it, make our own single, demo, and then we'll get some pressed, which so we went into we settled on Stacey Road Studios, the BBC studios that you, in the downtime, you could hire them quite cheaply with a guy called Des Bennett. So we went in, we did it in two, you know, one night for the backing, one night for the vocals and the lead guitar overdub, and one night for the mixes. So it was 9 hours altogether. We got it pressed by a company called SRT, which was one of the independent pressing plants. We sort of sent it off to, you know, we sold it as well as we could at gigs and round Cardiff. We had 500 pressed. We sent it off to the radio, and a couple of DJs picked up on it, which was you know, the sort of thing that could happen in those days when indie records, or whatever they called them, were new. And it got picked up by a few people, and that was about it, you know. And on the back of that, it got picked up via a guy called Howard Marks, who is not the Howard Marks. He still gets
shame.
He gets mixed up. Well, the other Howard Marks is dead, and it's a hoot because they've actually met, you know.
Okay.
Where, obviously, when Howard Marks, Druggy Marks, was alive, they bumped into each other and said hello. But anyway, Howard Marks picked up on it and got us a one-off deal with Virgin Records.
Well, I actually had I was in the kitchen in Cardiff, Randy, and had a phone call from somebody who said, "Oh, hello, John." This was after Andy Peebles had been, after Howard Marks had put the record, pushed the record for Radio 1. And I had a phone call from Andy Peebles while I was cooking in the kitchen. And he said, he was live on air at the time, and was asking me about the single and to tell him about the band and saying how much he loved it. I don't know if you remember that, but that was quite a shock, you know, suddenly. It wasn't live on air, but in between records, he was just having a little chat about the records.
Great, I didn't forget that one.
I mean, there's a few things with that, and I'm going to sound like a nostalgic old git, probably because I am, but there's a few things that come out of that. Like you said, the idea of, you know, independent stuff being picked up on, people actually buying things, you know, vinyl, and you know, the kind of impact of a name like Andy Peebles, you know, playing your song, you know, it's such an important way, John, for sort of bands to be sort of discovered and to break bands. It doesn't seem to happen so much these days. You know, Spotify, we're lucky we go on the right playlist, you know.
The world has changed so much. I mean, it's staggering the you know, the huge change in the music industry since those days, isn't it? I mean, on the plus side, now it's so easy to make music that people can hear, isn't it? And you can tell your Aunt Mildred in Sydney, you know, to listen to Spotify, and there you are.
Yeah.
But and you haven't got to be sort of kowtow to record companies to the same extent. People do have huge success now without the record companies being involved. Back in those days, almost everybody had to be, you know, backed by a record player, a record company rather. But we did manage to get a certain way, you know, without that. And but that was pretty unusual, wasn't it, Andy? What was the name of the band? The Buzzcocks, wasn't it? I think that gave us the inspiration for doing our own single.
Was it? Yeah, it could have been. Yeah.
It was. I think it was the Buzzcocks. What was that? Their first single, and I remember talking about it. And they'd done their own pressing and managed to get people interested. And we thought, well, that's a good idea. You were the
Spiral
Scratch. That was it. Yeah. But you were always the impetus behind any action, because we were basically very lazy, and we needed somebody to say, come on, let's do this, come on, let's do that. And we would never have done what we did without your kick up the backside.
my Nazi approach. Absolutely.
What came out of that single then, Andy, in terms of having that airplay? What were the kind of immediate kind of benefits of that?
None really. I mean, we did we make money? No, we had an advance which was in the hundreds rather than the thousands. And did we clear the advance? No, but we got it's funny because it was released, and I've never been able to track down a copy, but it was released in Finland on the Polavox label. As well. Also, and we sort of found out by accident years and years later, there was it was put out in Australia on, and I forget the name of the label, but I actually tracked down a copy of that, which I have. And praise the Lord, we were bootlegged. We were on a. Oh, you know, that really is. It was on an EP, an LP on what I think it's called the Xerox label. It's called Teenage Treats Volume 4, and I would counsel against googling it, because if you Google Teenage Treats, you're going to get trouble. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, we were on that. We were bootlegged, you know. So hallelujah, you know that.
Yeah.
What Andy? I've forgotten that story. What was it a live recording, or was it actually Life of Riley? You know.
No, it was no. They on Teenage Treats Vol 4. No, they just sort of run the record. It was the record. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Of course, these days, you know, with electronic stuff, like I said, going back to the Spotify thing, you know, you put an album together, and next thing you know, it's everywhere before you've even released it. You know, so it's a same horse, different jockey, I suppose. So, in terms of the gigs, then, John, I guess, were you touring? Did it mean you get? You said that, you know, you played in. You started off in the Great Hall, so that's not a bad start. But did Zipper go on to?
It was all downhill after that.
Was it?
Of course it was,
We never did any big gigs. I mean, we used to play a lot around Cardiff and up in the valleys, and we'd occasionally get as far as sort of Street and places like that, or Bristol. But we didn't do much in the way of touring, but we were continually being promised tours by people, random sort of promoters and would-be promoters, who would promise us, you know, tours of Europe and this sort of thing. But the promised tour never came.
Andy, just do what my wife does. Just ignore my advice. By the way, we just move the mic wherever you think is best. I was just trying to avoid the mic popper.
Is that okay?
Yeah, they're temperamental. They're really hard to get right. Those things, aren't they? So you don't get the mic pop on it.
Yeah.
So was it most the original stuff then that Zipper? And did you write most of the stuff for the band, Andy?
Yeah. And I mean, it was a sort of a hodgepodge of you know, it was sort of, it started out, I would say, more as pub rock than punk. You know, we were a little bit, you know, not ahead, but we were, you know.
What year was that then? You started out?
Well, the band was it was 76 when I joined,
so
and
like
it was on the cusp. It was on the cusp, you know. But
okay.
I know we did, and John did write a song. I think about it's punks, and I've never been able to match this couplet. Well, he went for a job as a sewerage chap, but they couldn't tell the difference between him and the crap, you know. And
brilliant.
That. Yeah, it's
how embarrassing.
Sorry, mate.
Was that the follow-up single, was it?
It should have been, yeah. And I think John used to go on with he invented this sort of safety pin through the head thing with a coat hanger, which a few months later, I think Max Boyce's bass player had seen it, and Max Boyce co-opted it at some point, you know. Safety pin through the head.
Are there any pictures of that by any chance?
I think I have got one, actually.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
We'd love to use that picture for the website, I think.
Yeah, I'll see if I can dig it out. Yeah. I think it's either that, or I've got a razor blade about 2 feet long, which I made myself out of a cardboard box and used to hang off my ear. So it's either the safety pin or the razor blade, one or the other.
Yeah.
See, when I think of that song, you know, I don't think punk. You know, I think it's kind of more refined than that. That was what was going on. So I suppose you were trying to capture the zeitgeist, I suppose, and be a part of that. I mean, was that kind of limiting at all, Andy, in terms of kind of pigeonhole?
Riley, as I say, Riley was written in probably 74, 75, which was before,
pre-punk. Yeah.
You know, and I suppose the great influence on it was the Kinks. You know, that was probably my lifelong influence, and that got actually recognised by who was it? Charles Shaw Murray, who was the NME bloke. He said who said it was, and I can quote this because it's in plays a fair little shalala reminiscent of Ray Davies in his sociology days, jolly sardonic tune, worthy of greater exposure than it'll probably get, you know. So there we are. That's a little puff, you know. Yeah.
Nice though. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah. No. So the influence was pre-punk, really, you know.
But I think when we went on stage, all the punk thing was happening, and I think we partly wanted to be a part of it and partly take the mick out of it at the same time. So we did have a fairly sort of raucous type of stage presence, didn't we? We were fairly unpredictable, a bit like punk. And so I think we had that sort of slightly punk mania, but also we knew we weren't really punks. So we used to sort of take the mick at the same time. So it was a bit of both, really.
Who was also in Zipper with you?
Well, there were quite a few manifestations, weren't there, Andy? But Ray Sinclair, the chap I mentioned earlier, was the guitar player for a couple of years. On drums, who was the original? Pete McCann on drums.
Pete McCann, and then a couple, and then Chris Brazier, who was on the single.
Chris Brazier, played on Life of Riley.
Funny, I was talking to Chris the other day. He phoned me up. It was nice, you know.
Yeah.
I bumped into him in a pub in Cardiff about 6 to 9 months ago, I think. His brother's Rob, is that right?
Rob, that's it. Yeah.
It
was more
and of course, more in the mice. Yeah.
That was it. Yeah. So it's all, you know, the old scene. Yeah.
So talking about the old scene, you mentioned Carl Hyde. So was Carl Hyde, was he like a mate of yours, Andy? Did you socialise with him at all?
No. I used to say hello to him, and I think the Screen Gems, as it were, went through a phase of storing their gear in my garage in Biscuit Street. You know, it's just a thing.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't know each other. But funnily enough, I was on a songwriting course with a woman called Angie Pollock, who actually plays with him. She's a sort of a keyboardist. She's been in Goldfrapp and all sorts. And we got into this sort of conversation about a couple of things actually. And I said, "Oh yeah, Carl, yeah, play with Carl and do remember him to him," which she did. And we had a nice little message back saying, "Never forget you," you know, which was nice, you know.
He wrote some very nice things about us on a blog, which somebody pointed out to me. Yeah. So he was a big fan of ours at the time, which was nice to know. Yeah. Especially as you know, he's obviously done so well.
Yeah.
Probably would never have been famous without our influence.
No,
absolutely. You know,
the magic of the garage, kind of. You know.
Absolutely, the garage. And dear Lord.
But looking at those days, looking back on those days, there was some good stuff going on, wasn't there? You know, we mentioned a few names that were around. I really like the Screen Gems. Did he come on with a bunch of TVs? Is that right? I'm right in thinking that?
That was one of the, I think that was one of their things. Yeah.
So how do you? I don't know whether either of you keep an eye on it at all, really, because neither of you in the area anymore now. But I suppose how healthy is the kind of music business, do you think, in terms of sort of, you know, the zippers of today, you know, the young up and coming bands? What kind of a chance, you said, John, about, you know, with Spotify means you're kind of virtually mobile. You can be anywhere you like in the world. But how do you sort of visualize it for up and coming bands now, you know, in terms of...
Well, of course, the current situation is appalling, you know, for bands with the COVID thing, because nobody's allowed to play anywhere.
No.
Because I did hear that you're now allowed to have a band in a pub, for example, as long as they play very quietly. I don't know quite how they determine that, but I think there's some new sort of legislation they're thinking about, which will allow, I guess, solo singers and that sort of thing. What they don't want is people, you know, getting too enthusiastic and, you know, everybody singing along and that sort of thing, which is supposed to pass the virus on. But it's a really tragic time at the moment. funny enough, I have been playing with Ray, the ex-guitarist who lives in St Agnes, 15, 20 minutes drive from here. And we've been getting together and putting together a little set of songs. And we got to the stage where we were ready to go out and unleash ourselves on an unsuspecting world. And the COVID thing immediately came along and shut every pub within 500 miles. So our talents have yet to be brought to the public, sadly. But I to go back to your question, I'm hoping that when all this stuff finishes, you know, that the scene will get back, and you know, proper live music will become appreciated again. I'm sure people will be so hungry for it when they've been deprived for so long. So let's hope that there's a sort of rebound effect where people want to see live acts again.
Yeah, I mean, for the venues and the acts. But when you were talking there, you said your guitarist, your former guitarist is 15 minutes away. Andy Brice is here, you know. I mean, surely, you know, the world is crying out for, aren't they, Andy, for a reincarnation of Zipper, you know?
Well,
surely.
it's
the second
never
coming, you know.
Has it ever quite gone away? I don't know. Yeah. We're sort of like Cornwall is about 90 miles long, is it? And I think John and I are about 60 miles away from each other. So it's a bit I mean, doubtless we will get together for a bit of leaping and twitching at some point, but
we will for sure. Yeah. Long overdue.
Yeah.
And you're still playing though, Andy, anyway, aren't you?
Yeah. I stood down at the moment because of COVID crisis, but I've been working in a little 3-piece covers band called Off the Wall, which I've enjoyed a lot, you know, ever since I moved back down here, which was 8 or 9 years ago now. So this was my original stomping ground, so I'm glad to be back.
So I'll come to John on this, but for both of you, have you got a particular venue, maybe one which isn't around anymore, that you particularly enjoyed playing in the Cardiff area when you were doing the Zipper stuff? John?
Is that for you, Andy, or me?
That's you, mate.
I'll go to you first.
Oh, for me, sorry. Yeah. Well, I can answer that immediately without even thinking it, and that's the New Moon Club. The New Moon will always be I'll always have amazing memories of that place. The characters there, the fantastic bands, the whole sort of idiosyncratic mess that the Moon was. It was just an incredible place to go and play. And I remember the excitement before I ever actually got to play there, of walking down St Mary's Street and hearing, first of all, the distant thump of a bass, and then the drums, and then as you went round the corner of this weird sort of thin triangular building, and you could hear the crash of the sound coming down the rickety old stairs, and there was nothing like it. Yeah. And that's my favourite by far.
That's a great answer. The reason that I was thinking when you were talking then, because these days, again, going back to kind of modernism stuff, you know, with the Moon Club, people think of Woolsey Street, you know, they think of the Moon, you know, there's the new venue, but it's totally, maybe it's a nod towards that club. So I was only talking about it yesterday, Andy, and what a idiosyncratic / dangerous place it was.
It was. Well, yeah, and I mean, I'd second John on that. You know, and I was quite proud, really, that we were not of the old school of bands up there. Although the amazing John Turner, who was a drummer in Eager Beaver, who was one of the established bands, joined us. But we were sort of neither, you know, the old bands that played cocaine for 20 minutes, nor were we sort of the white hot punks. We were sort of somehow in the middle. And the Moon, we used to get away with it at the Moon. We had a Thursday night residency for you know, yonks, really. And I loved the Moon, even though the beer was watered down, you know.
Well, bottles of Newcastle Brown mostly, wasn't
it? That's why everybody drank Newcastle Brown.
Well, no, but they had a crimper. They had a crimper and a supply of new caps, apparently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was sad to say, you know. But, I'm always proud to have been ripped off. You know, the place was so good. I didn't mind. You know.
I mean, I remember bands like you say, in bands like Tiger Bay, you know, in particular, kind of play Burke Shelley would occasionally come in and Depp on bass and whatever. It was just a fantastic.
I can remember Pino. I used to sort of die when Pino walked in. You know, but he was very, very gracious man. You know. I mean, the whole idea of that place, it just, you know, it'd be an absolute for years. It would have been an absolute non-starter on so many different grounds, wouldn't it? Yeah. It's ridiculous building for a venue, but a legendary venue nonetheless. The fire regs a go-go, you know.
Yeah. They had one Christmas decoration up for about 4 years.
That was it, yeah. Come on, boys. Yeah. Come on, band. Yeah, it's great, wasn't it? But yeah, it was allegedly that if you want, it wasn't that fighty. It was not that fighty.
No, you're right.
Compared to the top rank, you know, they had far more bother at the top rank, and I think it was probably alcohol versus marijuana was the sort of the thing, you know.
I walked in there sober and had a weird sensation within about 5 minutes.
That's it. Yeah. Just
this Newcastle Brown is strong this evening, you
know. Breathe. Yeah.
John, on a different note altogether, of course, you worked with my dad, didn't you, for a number of years?
Yes, at Thomas Cook's.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, the travel agency. It wasn't one of my favourite jobs, I must admit, sending other people on holiday.
Yeah.
I spent most of my 5 days a week feeling very jealous of other people.
Yeah, I imagine you did. What was my dad like to work with? I think he had his Hayes Island routine with a pasty and a cup of tea at lunchtime. Was his regular thing.
He was a lovely man. I'm not saying that because you're his son, but no, he. There were a couple of people there that I definitely didn't get on with and didn't like at all. But your dad wasn't one of them. He was a real gentleman. He was a lovely fella. And always had a kind word to say, and I remember him very well. Yeah,
I remember him going on about certain people he didn't get on with, but you were the one he liked. One of the ones.
Oh, well, that's nice.
He had some good friends there as well, but there was a certain amount of competition going on there. Yeah. So I thought I'd say that to you because obviously that was a personal connection.
Absolutely, yeah.
So looking to the future, then, as and when we come through all of this stuff. You know, I love the idea of the Zipper reunion, but I don't think it's gonna happen. You're looking to get something together as well, John. Yeah. So
yes, just as a little 2-piece initially. We'll see what happens after that. But we made pretty good progress, and then just the timing was wrong. But we'll resurrect that before too long.
And John Turner, as you probably know, you worked with Dave Durnley in the shop for a long time, and through all of this stuff, that shop is not going to be there now. And
no, so many.
Dave's working
people.
from home. Yeah, exactly. And it's an end of an era, really, because I think Dave and John, they'll no longer, they were like a team, weren't they? So, that's another thing which has come out of it.
Yeah.
Andy, just come to you finally then, as the man who wrote The Life of Riley. Yeah. Do you have any looking back on Zipper? I mean, and your time as a band, and you had that great success of getting it out there as the Radio 1 Single of the Week and everything else. Any regrets looking back on your time with did you kind of have visions of it becoming bigger than it did?
Yeah, I suppose the regret. I mean, we weren't a sort of a pro band. I mean, we were all sort of either in college or working and stuff. And I was quite pleased with myself that we actually, from a basis of part-timeness and untogetherness, we actually got further than some bands who were sort of funded to tour and put on a wage and all that sort of caper. I mean, it's not. I'm still writing. I'm still, doing stuff, and it's probably only indolence that stopped me from trying to market it a bit more, But no, I'm from my own point of view, I'm quite happy with the world, Yeah.
Did you have anything to add to that, John, in terms of your?
No, I'm so glad that fame and fortune never came along, Steve.
Yeah.
It would have been lovely to to have seen something else happen and to have done some touring and you know, play to more people. But at the end of the day, we did far better than I ever thought we would. And I'm extremely happy to have those memories to look back on.
Cool.
So yeah, no regrets at all about that.
Excellent. Well, John and Andy, thank you very much for your time. Good luck to you. Nice to speak to you. Keep up the songwriting, and I'll see you on tour. Yeah.
Yeah.